Hello, let us introduce ourselves. We are the UCare Project, a group of scientists based all over the UK that are working together to harness the properties of UV light. We use special UV light to work on developing medical technology that can be used to treat a range of different diseases, including antimicrobial resistance, a really big problem facing healthcare right now. Our technology means that these diseases will be treated easier and patients will be able to recover quicker. UV light is all around us and is a form of radiation that can be emitted by artificial sources, like UV lamps used in nail salons or naturally like the sun. There are lots of warnings about UV light, and we must be careful when we're exposed to it due to health risks such as cancer. But UV light can also have healthcare benefits for people. For example, it helps us create vitamin D, which is needed for keeping bones, teeth, and muscles healthy. UV light treatment is also a possibility for some skin conditions, such as psoriasis, and works well in clearing the skin up, but this should only be used under medical supervision to prevent an increased risk of cancer. If UV light causes cancer, won't it be dangerous for us to use that in our technology for medical treatment? Well, the UV light that UCare is working on is special. It'll still kill off that bad bacteria, but it won't cause cancer or harm the human tissue as much as other sorts of UV light. UV light exists in the electromagnetic spectrum, and there are 3 types of UV light we'll talk about today. UVC, which is responsible for disinfection and sanitization but can also harm cells. UVB, which is responsible for skin burns and vitamin D production. And UVA, which is what is responsible for our skin tanning. The reason that UCare's UV light is so special is that we harness it from the deep UV in the UVC category. So remember, this has harming cells and causing cancer, but also sterilization. So by looking into the deep UV, we've managed to get a wavelength of the UV that kills the bacteria but cannot cause cancer. Having this UV light that we can use to kill off bacteria is great, but how do we transport it into the human body? We want this to be as non-invasive as possible, so let's take a look at how light gets transported for technology nowadays. You might have heard of optical fibres before. These can be used in different bits of lighting, for example in your car, or more commonly known for being used to deliver the internet to our homes and offices. It does this by transmitting information as a pulse of light, and this makes it much faster than its predecessor, the copper wire. But how does this work? Well, a light particle is called a photon, and it travels along the fibre, staying inside as if the walls are made of mirrors and it's being reflected off them. So the light travels down a fibre optic cable by bouncing off the walls repeatedly. The optical fibres we use at UCare are special. Usual fibres will be hollow on the inside, and as a result, the UV light that travels through them is absorbed greatly. Whereas ours has to have a hollow core in the middle of the fibre, which means that they can be directed into a single point, but also they won't absorb all of that deep UV that we need to kill off that bad bacteria. Want to introduce yourself?
So my name's Robert Thompson. I'm the principal investigator of the EPSRC funded UCare project.
And I'm Carla Suchu. I'm the public engagement officer for the UCare project. So I'm just here asking Rob a few questions today. And I'd quite like to start off with, what was your inspiration for the UCare project?
Well, the inspiration was the clinical applications that deep UV light could potentially be used for. And so at herriot-watt, we have a very close relationship with the medical school at the University of Edinburgh. And so we're continually being informed about the challenges that they face in the hospital and in the clinic. And so one of the challenges that the clinicians have talked about is infection. And they're particularly interested in non-pharmaceutical ways to treat infection. And one of the potential technologies here that could make an impact is light, using light to treat infection. And so that's really what motivated the discussions around how we could use deep UV light to actually treat and prevent infections. And then the other area which got us interested in deep UV light is actually in the area of treating cancer. And so there are cancers that sadly are very hard to treat, like in the brain, for example. And one of the reasons they're so hard to treat is because they're so close to critical structures, such as arteries. And so when you resect away the tumors, when you take them away, what you want to do is you want to take as much of the tumor away as possible, but that means that you then get close to the critical structures. So there's a balance. You don't want to leave tumor behind, but you also don't want to damage those critical structures. So this is another area where we saw that deep UV lasers could potentially provide a solution.
Yeah, it's a bit like you're walking on a tightrope when you're up in the rain.
That's a great analogy, Carla.
Yeah. Is there a reason why they're interested in non-pharmaceutical methods?
So for treating infection, there is, and I'm sure that people will have heard about AMR, antimicrobial resistance, and how the overuse of antibiotics is driving antimicrobial resistance and making antibiotics unfortunately less and less useful over time. And so and light could be one route to treat infection without using drugs such as antibiotics. And so that's really where the inspiration and the motivation came from, the germicidal side of using deep UV light.
And what would you say is the most satisfying part of the project for you?
Wow. I think there are many different things that are satisfying about a project like this. Of course, we have the big vision, and the big vision is to eventually impact patient care on the 10, 15, 20-year timescale. But that is the big vision, and it's a long way, and there's a lot of work to be done en route to getting there. And before we get there, there are lots of very important achievements in the project. And one of the top achievements for me is seeing the more junior researchers and PhD students that are part of the project come in, get trained up, get experience doing things that they would never otherwise be able to do, and then go off and do great things, And then in addition to that training aspect, there's then the fundamental science that we do as well, developing the technologies, publishing the papers, doing the tech transfer. And then there's the stuff that we work on together, Carla, the public engagement, inspiring the younger generations and the broader public. So there's not just one thing about a project like this that is the main enjoyable feature of it. It's a lot of different things, actually.
Yeah, I think I'd be hard pressed to think about one thing and just the public engagement side of it. So yeah, it was a tricky question for me. And say we have a crystal ball and everything goes perfectly well, where do you see it in 5 years?
Well, as I said, 5 years I think is quite short term for having the healthcare impact that we think these technologies can have. In 5 years, I'd very much like us to be at the stage where we've secured the follow-on translational funding that then allows us to take the technologies we develop into kind of first clinical trials. But beyond that, as I said, on the the 10, 15, 20-year timescales, that's when we would really like to see these technologies have gone through clinical trials, have been commercialized, and really starting to be used more, routinely in a clinical environment.
So when do you think the healthcare impact would be, we would get to that stage at?
So the healthcare impact really is only truly enabled through commercialization, because then that's how you have widespread clinical impact. So as I said, I think that will be probably realistically on the kind of 15-year timescale after all the clinical trials have been done, the commercialization, the ruggedization that is necessary to actually enable these technologies to have a widespread clinical impact. That's a long journey, actually. We don't see any physical blocks to that. There are no, that we can see right now anyway, there are no physical reasons why this journey should be prevented. But at the same time, there's a big difference between demonstrating a laser on an optical table in a physics lab, and there's a big difference to demonstrating that and actually being able to put it in a small box with a battery and sell it to maybe tens of thousands of people around the world. That's a big step, and there's a whole engineering journey that's required to be undertaken to enable that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rob. And you can you can follow along with our journey as well on Twitter at EPSRC_UKare. So I thought that was pertinent to mention.
The technology we're
so much,
developing in the
Carla.
UKare project
Great
means
to
that we
speak to you
can now
today,
address the
and catch up
problems
soon.
that are affecting the world of healthcare. One of these problems is the rise of antimicrobial resistance. You might have heard about this before. As Rob says, when people overuse antibiotics or use them incorrectly, it can make them less effective. Bacteria are clever, so they mutate to avoid being harmed by the antibiotics. It means that antibiotics could end up not working at all in the future, with bacterial infections being untreatable, and this could eventually endanger lives. Our technology aims to kill bacteria, and to do this in different parts of the body. Using fibre optics, we can deliver our deep UV light into tough-to-reach spaces and fight against one of the biggest problems facing our future.